All right. Hi there. My name is Martijn Boone. I'm Principal Solutions Consultant at SpeakUp. I've been around for over 8 years. And today we will talk about the challenges with traditional call centers in the whistleblowing setting. And for this, we have today our new CEO, Tim.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been in the industry for over 10 years now. Joined Speak Up about 4 months ago. So it's exciting to be here and exciting to talk about this topic.
Yeah, fantastic. So, of course, the traditional call centers, they've been around for a while, right? I think that's where everything started in the early 2000s after the very big scandals where, yeah, from where the actual mandatory setup of whistleblowing programs came around. It's, of course, relatively natural, if I think about it, that if you have a problem on the work floor, that you may actually want to talk to another human. Curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's where we saw things first arise was with the call center approach. You then saw some new other solutions due to a variety of different factors with voice Dropbox type options. Web obviously has come in as probably the predominant way of people reporting. I think the most exciting times are in front of us, though. There's new approaches, new technology, new ways of taking in information that I think will really change the industry quite a bit as we look into 2025 in the future.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So we'll definitely come to talk about AI, of course. And I think the main problem when it comes to this topic, when we're discussing, intake over phone, is that people say, okay, it has to be a human, but who is actually the right human, right? And what we see with you've worked also, at other organizations, and you have a lot of insights in, yeah, how it actually works in practice. What kind of humans are picking up the phone for these whistleblowing complaints in any case at the main providers, and what does that actually do to the situation?
Yeah, I think the thing people often talk about is empathy, right? So it's a sensitive situation. People are reporting. So, naturally, you want to feel comfortable when you're making that report. So you'll often hear that is one of the big reasons. But then it's to your point, what's really happening? And there's a few primary approaches that you see.
Yeah.
So there are some boutique providers, smaller providers that do, they might employ ex detectives or things like that and really provide a premium option where it is someone who really knows how to take in that type of information. However, that's usually not what people are using. There's the bigger companies out there who have either an in-house contact center, but even when you really dig into your sub processors, you'll see actually it's a lot of it's outsourced to different call centers. These places have, really high turnover, and especially in the outsource model, while they're taking in a call intake, they may then be taking in hotel reservation or something like that on the next phone call because the
Yeah.
volume is so low.
Yeah.
Those are a couple of things, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, of course, very interesting, right? So you, as an employer, you want to make sure your employees feel comfortable. And in doing so and taking a step in, I think, the right direction, you're actually ending up in a situation that's maybe a little bit less comfortable for that employee because they end up speaking not to somebody with knowledge of the organization. They don't have knowledge of actual managing complicated compliance concerns or personal issues, and they can also not really advise. And what I hear a lot is that the way to counteract is to work with pre-scripted or pre-defined questionnaires for these people, so that whoever answers the phone, the experience is the same.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. They have their computer screen, someone calls, maybe there was an access code. So now you get this prompt on your screen. Maybe you were able to provide to them, hey, make sure to collect these bits of information. But ultimately, you're going to be getting a scripted experience, which I won't say is necessarily bad. There's certain information that you want to collect, but the trade-off is you're not really getting that empathetic experience. There's also the nature of human beings. While we'll get into AI later, whenever I hear that, I often get the what if AI makes a mistake or it's robotic. One of my airlines that I fly with, who I won't name, but there's a phrase for them called hookah, which is hang up, call again. So it's a known thing for calling the call center of if you don't get the response you want, hang up and call again. That's okay when you're trying to change a flight. But when you're reporting something, that variability from person to person can pose a lot of challenges. And there absolutely is that's just the reality of call centers. If you've ever worked in one, which I've worked one of the major telecommunications provider in a call center, I know how they work. There's a large degree of difference between different people.
And that differentiation and variability is, of course, something that people try to cut out when an individual that's going to report a misconduct case is only going to be there once, if you're lucky, right? There's also a lot of people that choose to just not go through the whole ordeal because there's some other things that we hear as well, right? I've heard in my work, the longest waiting time that somebody mentioned was 45 minutes to get a Danish translator on the phone. Suppose you only speak Danish, nobody's ever going to actually wait 45 minutes, right?
No.
And even if we would now just be quiet for 1 or 2 minutes, that's super long. And for an individual that's in that position where they're considering, okay, am I or am I not going to leave that sensitive message about, I don't know, my senior manager, those 2 minutes may be already too long for them and they might disengage with the process.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you think of how people react in different parts of a business. If you were to ask someone on in the marketing function, all the analysis they do on making sure someone completes a form, for example, it's militant. You get down to the very specific details. So drop-off rates are a huge problem. So in whistleblowing, we should be thinking about it the same way. How are we facilitating that intake? And there's obviously a balance that has to be struck between you having enough information to conduct an investigation, but then also collecting the report. Ultimately, what's the risk of if it's just so frustrating that they just hang up and they just don't do it? That's probably a higher risk than maybe it not being perfect when it comes.
Yeah. And I think that's what's something that SpeakUp, since its foundation, has been focusing a lot on is setting up that actual dialogue, right? And I believe that creating the dialogue and starting at like an easy initial point can really drive further development of the conversation. But of course, you need to bring a process in place that also facilitates this actual checking back, right? What we also see is that in this reality of having human call centers, we haven't spoken about very detailedly yet about that international setting. So even if you have a translator or live interpreter in the call, there's awkward three-way conversation, right? Which also have its risks.
Yeah, and I think that's why you see such a divide in the industry between US and European providers and the adoption there, right? So US, most people speak English, although that's becoming less and less true as time goes on. And then you have populations in certain states that are much more comfortable speaking a different language. But in Europe, you have so many different languages, and English not being, whether even if it's a second language, a lot of times still not even be able to speak it, right? So then you have to wait for an interpreter to come on, and that just brings in a number of problems. Anything from just the time. If it's French, yeah, they're probably going to find someone pretty quick. But if it's other languages, as you mentioned, Danish, I lived in Denmark actually for a couple of years, and there's 5 million people that speak Danish. That's the population. It's not a language that you speak if you don't live in Denmark. And it's a difficult language to learn. I can speak from experience. So yeah.
Yeah, what I hear is that there's risk of information loss in that process, right? If we then look at the other approach, which is the voice drop box, I think quite a number of the challenges that we just discussed are solved there, but comes with some challenges of its own, right? I think one of the main benefits is that the voice drop means that the initial message of the reporter is being recorded, and only subsequently there is maybe a translation or transcription or something like that can be inspected. But there are other potential downsides to it as well.
Yeah, I think the biggest one is you can't control what you get in the report. So while you reduce the friction for getting the report, which is the trade-off, it's very easy to leave a report. You're not in control of what you get. So you can't probe for where did it happen, what location, who was involved, so on and so forth. So you can give some broad instruction, but you can't get into that dialogue, which presents a challenge. One of the other things that you mentioned that when we talk about three-way calling is cost element. The compliance budgets. I'd love to we all wish they were bigger than they are, but they're stretched thin. And then this creates a level of lack of predictability. When you have to bring interpreters in, all of a sudden you get an invoice for those costs and translation costs, interpreter costs. All these things just add up, and they're incredibly frustrating for companies to have to deal with as well.
Yeah. So these cost elements, they also make costs variable, right? And I think we've all worked at some point in sales, and whenever you come to a procurement person, mention a variable cost, it always makes things more complicated, and people tend to get a little bit uncomfortable with it. And what I've also noticed is that these voice drop boxes, they can work very well, but they are heavily reliant on the check back rate and people actually returning to the platform, check back in, listen to the response of the company, responding again, and thereby actually developing the dialogue. And these things are, of course, technically possible, but what I've seen myself is that the main challenge there is that organization has to do quite a bit of work in communicating and educating the employees on how this is all supposed to work and what is expected from them. And yeah, I don't know, do you have any opinions furthermore on there? Because I think if an organization does that right, this voice drop box can work actually quite well.
Yeah, I think it can. I think it all comes into how you're set up as an organization, and if you're resourced appropriately, you got the right communication, training, awareness materials. You to your point, you're starting a dialogue, you're starting a conversation. The flip side is if you don't have those things, it could create work, and maybe you don't have the resources or bandwidth to deal with it as much. Which is what we've seen from people that maybe came from other approaches. That change management process that you have to go through is often the challenge, which is 100% of the time, the biggest challenge is, more broadly speaking, with making changes in whistleblowing provider is change management.
Yeah,
It's just a lot of work.
fantastic. So we've discussed the traditional call center approach, we have discussed the voice drop box, and in both of them, we recognize a couple of challenges, right? We've mentioned long waiting times, we mentioned live interpreters with a risk of information loss, we mentioned cost, and we mentioned inconsistency and dependency on reporter to actually return to the system to further complete their message. So I'm curious to hear, what are your thoughts on artificial intelligence to actually counteract some of these challenges? Because I've seen you being quite enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, I think just broadly speaking, in the next 5 to 10, you never know how quickly people will adopt things, but this is clearly the direction of travel. I was on the phone with one of the largest companies that sells call center services, and they're even coming up with their own AI agents to
Really?
do this,
Wow.
because that's you're going to be people are just going to go past you if you don't do that. And I think the main hesitancy is the lack of education I see in the market around how good these things have gotten. Everyone's used to calling into an IVR solution where, again, not to pick on airlines, but you call in and you get this, you say something and then you get like this weird noise, and then they ask another question. You have to repeat yourself 9 times to get them to understand it.
Yeah.
AI has just blown the doors off that, and it's become conversational to the point where you almost have to program these things to make sure people know they're talking to a person, because you want to be transparent about these things. But it's gotten scarily good, and just to think we're at the opening phases
Yeah, it's only
of
just
what's
getting
possible.
started, right? But already now we see, of course, the potential that this AI is there. And the AI doesn't care about waiting times. It's there when you call it. AI doesn't care about language. It just switches language instantly, doesn't matter. And I think there you already cut out two very important points from the traditional call center approach that we were just discussing.
Yeah, and I think those are two huge points, right? So when you call the phone, it immediately is picked up by a digital agent. That digital agent, depending on the phone line you call in, can already start speaking in that native language. And again, if you haven't seen these, they're fluent. They speak these languages fantastically with the right inflections, the right tonality. It's not just, I always think of the old Macintosh voiceover. It's totally changed. So when someone calls from pick your country, they're going to hear a voice native in that language and begin to immediately report in that language. And think of everything that cuts out. You cut out a three-way call, you cut out waiting times, you cut out errors in transcription that may happen. So not only are you going to get that, but you're going to get something very complete at the end of it as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned complete, and so how are we supposed to expect this to work? Will it just the scripted questionnaire, ask question by question, or because we mentioned like the word natural, uh, I never feel very natural when somebody's just asking me some standardized fixed question. What can we expect in this?
It's pretty crazy what you can do with programming the AI. You can have it follow a ton of different approaches. So anything from a very structured approach, you can change the tone. Do you want a very empathetic tone, a very stern tone? You can have it in a very structured manner where it goes down a list of questions, or you can program it to start a conversation and it's programmed to look to obtain this information, but do it in a more natural conversational way. So there's so many ways that these can be programmed. And then beyond that, the thing that, unless you're operating the call center yourself, you just can't do is the training ability of you have your own policies, your own content, your own locations, et cetera, et cetera. All of that can be built into the AI so that it's not just, you know, picking up the next phone, but it's truly tuned to your organization, which is just something that a call center will really never be able to do.
Yeah, I think that sounds really exciting, and I'm very curious to see, where this will go actually in 2025 for SpeakUp. So we see that AI is going to play a big role for this organization, and yeah, stay tuned for more updates.